Hey guys, tonight we're going to wander into the candlelit, suspiciously smoky world of medieval taverns. Those cozy, questionable places where people stumbled in for a pint of ale and left with questionable decisions, louder voices, and possibly a few missing teeth. It's like happy hour, but with more mud, rats, and mystery meat. So before you kick back and listen to tales of drunken peasants, medieval fashion faux pas, and food that's probably best described as forageable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy the chaos I'm about to inflict on you. Leave a comment telling me which historical figure you'd invite to a tavern, and no, the answer can't be just anyone who can cook me a good steak. Now dim those lights, put on a fan if you like, get cozy, and tuck your feet under the covers, because let's face it, you don't know what's lurking around in the medieval dark. It's time to settle into the atmosphere of an era so unpleasant, you might start being grateful for modern plumbing, which you definitely will be by the end of this. But first, let's ask ourselves a few absurdly relatable questions. Ever wondered what it would be like to party in a place where you're pretty sure the floor hasn't seen a cleaning rag since the Black Plague? Can you even imagine drinking from a tankard that's been used by half the village and is probably covered in a mix of spit, sweat, and unidentifiable liquids? How exactly did they handle social distancing in a space where everyone was already packed in like sardines? Oh, and what's the deal with medieval hygiene anyway? Spoiler alert, it's worse than you think. All right, congratulations. You've just woken up in the year 1307, and you've stumbled into a dimly lit tavern. Let's hope you don't get stuck with the seat near the fireplace. And by the way, don't order the stew. Seriously, don't do it. Picture this. You've just stepped into a medieval tavern, the heavy oak doors creaking behind you as a wall of warm, musty air slaps you in the face. The room smells like a mix of old wood, wet fur, and the lingering remnants of garlic-heavy stew. Oh, and a touch of human sweat. The space is so packed that you're basically forced to shuffle through a crowd of burly peasants who look like they've been living off turnips for weeks. And it's all accompanied by the pleasant sound of boisterous laughter that might be more, "I'm trying not to cry," than "I'm having a great time." As you stand there trying to catch your breath, both literally and figuratively, you realize there's no real personal space here. The air is so thick with smoke that it feels like you're wading through a fog of regret and bad decisions. The room is dimly lit, mostly by a handful of candles that seem to be holding on to their last moments of life, flickering in the drafts like they're trying to escape. The flickering shadows dance across the faces of people whose expressions look half amused, half terrified. You can almost hear the conversation in their heads. Did I really just come here to drink something that might be made from dirt and get into a shouting match over whose turn it is to fetch more firewood? But the charm of the place isn't in the cleanliness, or the fresh air, or even the likelihood that you'll leave without a full-on respiratory infection. It's the sense of camaraderie, the fact that no one here is asking any hard questions. Everyone's just trying to get through the night, much like you. The noise level is deafening, but it's not the kind of noise that feels cheerful. It's more like a cacophony of people trying to shout over each other, desperately competing for attention, yet somehow still managing to blend into a sea of frustration and laughter. The sound of clinking tankards is constant, accompanied by the occasional scream of someone who's gotten a little too close to the fire. Some people are arguing about the best way to cook a rabbit, which is a surprising level of enthusiasm for something so suspiciously chewy, while others are too far gone to care. A man in the corner is slamming his fist on the table, either celebrating a victorious hand of dice or trying to convince the room that he's an undiscovered genius. His discovery of a lost idea is either a brilliant new way to brew ale or a bizarre scheme to trade leather boots for a sack of stale bread. But no one questions it. After all, what's a better deal than boots for bread? You don't even know what bread looks like in this time period. Suddenly, a group of villagers in the back stand up, clinking their mugs together in a toast. You don't know what they're celebrating. Maybe it's the fact that they've all managed to find enough food to eat that day, or perhaps they're toasting to their collective misery. But what's important is that they're together, and that seems to be the key to surviving this particular version of society. No one cares about hygiene, or that one person might have just spilled their ale on the floor, because in this room, the only thing that matters is the sense of shared experience. You notice a few other faces in the crowd, a woman in a dress that's too bright for a place like this. It might have been nice once, but now it's stained and hanging by a thread. A man with a large hat that looks like it could double as a fire hazard, and a guy standing near the hearth who's singing a song so out of tune that even the walls are cringing. But they're all here, and they're all trying to get by. You'll probably never see most of them again, but for now, you're all part of the same haphazardly assembled tapestry. It's not a glamorous life, but it's a life. And then there's the fire. The central hearth is crackling loudly, sending occasional bursts of heat through the room. You can feel your cheeks burn a little as the smoke swirls up and around you, leaving a layer of grime on your skin that will stick around for days. Every now and then, a log falls, and the flames jump up in protest, lighting up the smoke in a beautiful but chaotic way. You're pretty sure the flames have seen some things you really don't want to know about. But the fire's warm, and you're here to get warm, to escape the chill of the night and the harshness of life. At least that's the idea. It's not long before you spot the innkeeper, a man whose face looks like it's been etched into stone, permanently frowning from years of dealing with drunken villagers. He's barely looking at you, as if he already knows exactly what you want. A drink, a seat, and to somehow forget that your life is now intertwined with the questionable choices of everyone else in this room. You hesitate for a moment, unsure if you're about to make the best or worst decision of your day, but in the end, you order an ale. After all, it's the only option, and who are you to argue with the tradition of drowning your worries in the most questionable brew known to humankind? And so, you settle in. The evening stretches on. You'll probably leave with a headache, maybe a bit of a cough, and definitely an overwhelming sense of doubt about the food, the ale, and your life choices. But for now, you're part of the madness. And honestly, when in Rome, or in this case, when in a medieval tavern, what else can you do but laugh along, drink up, and hope you don't contract something horrible by morning? The tavern furniture is like a medieval IKEA challenge, sturdy, but impossible to sit in without contorting your spine. You spot a bench that looks like it's been through more battles than your great-grandfather. There's no cushion in sight, and the wood feels like it's about to declare war on your backside. The chair you're eyeing looks vaguely promising until you notice the suspicious stain on the seat. Is that beer or something else? Your best bet is to lean against the wall and hope for the best. You consider your options, and regrettably, there aren't many. The long benches look like they've been designed by someone with a vendetta against human comfort. The planks of wood are as flat as the fields outside the village, and any idea of relaxing on one is as ludicrous as asking a wolf for a hug. It's as if these benches were made to remind you that life is hard, and sitting down shouldn't be any different. The thing is, they aren't even all that well built. You'd be more confident in a chair made from twigs and optimism. In fact, you get the distinct feeling that every piece of furniture in here has a story, and none of them are particularly uplifting. The chair by the hearth, for instance, is missing a leg, and while you might assume this is some sort of rustic charm, it's more likely that it was just worn down by years of people drunkenly attempting to sit on it, only to collapse mid-toast. And then there's the floor. You glance down and realize that sitting on the floor, though technically an option, might come with a little extra texture. The wood is uneven, and the floors, covered in layers of spilled ale, dirt, and crumbs from God knows what, are as sticky as they are unsanitary. There's no way to sit without making an involuntary noise that will be awkwardly heard by everyone nearby. The air is thick with the smell of feet, damp wool, and old leather, which would make you gag if you weren't already resigned to your fate. Even the walls seem to press in on you, as if they too are aware that comfort has no place here. A sudden, unwelcome realization hits you. This isn't just about sitting. This is about survival. You're not here for luxury. No, this is about enduring the discomfort of the evening. You're playing the medieval version of musical chairs, but instead of music, you're listening to people loudly complain about taxes, weather, and whatever new affliction their neighbor might have caught, which is probably something worse than the flu. And the chairs, the benches, the stools, they're all part of the game. The real challenge is figuring out how not to look too ridiculous as you gingerly ease yourself onto the bench, trying to find a spot that doesn't make you feel like you're sitting on a pile of nails. The bar stools are slightly better, but only in the way that slightly better means still terrible. They're high-backed, yes, but they have that weird, awkward angle that makes you feel like you're perpetually teetering on the edge of falling off. You find yourself gripping the sides of the stool like you're about to board a ship in the middle of a storm, praying you'll stay upright long enough to finish your drink. You glance around the room to find that everyone else seems to be handling the furniture with a level of nonchalance that you just can't muster. Perhaps they've built up some kind of tolerance over the years, but you're pretty sure their spines are permanently misaligned. And then there's the matter of the tables. They're not much better than the chairs, barely wide enough to fit your ale, your bread, and the mystery stew you were brave enough to order. They're wobbly, uneven, and covered in gouges that look suspiciously like they were made by someone trying to carve their name into the wood, or maybe a frustrated customer who just realized their bread was stale and their ale lukewarm. The surface is sticky, a gross testament to the fact that no one has ever bothered to clean this place properly. You shift your mug slightly, and it seems to adhere to the table for a moment, as if making a pact with the furniture to never be moved again. But somehow, despite it all, you stick it out. There's something about the sheer absurdity of it that keeps you here, and despite your aching back and the cramp slowly spreading across your legs, you can't help but laugh at the situation. Because really, what choice do you have? You're in this medieval tavern now, and whether the chair feels like it's made from rocks or the table is sticky enough to ruin your entire evening, you're part of the experience. Sure, you could go outside and enjoy the fresh air, but where's the fun in that when you've already invested so much into your discomfort? So you take another sip of ale, brace yourself, and shift ever so slightly in the seat, silently wondering how much longer you'll last before this entire setup gets the best of you. It might be uncomfortable, but in a strange way, it's also what makes this whole experience oddly memorable. Because after all, isn't that the essence of a good tavern, having a tale to tell, no matter how sore you are afterward? You finally get a tankard of ale, and it's not exactly a drink of kings. The liquid is thick and brownish, like the love child of swamp water and regret. Is this what people actually drank to unwind? You take a tentative sip and immediately question all your life choices. It's like someone took sour bread dough, fermented it with stale water, and called it a beverage. But hey, at least it'll get you drunk, which seems to be the point of medieval drinking anyway. The taste hits you like a brick wall made of disappointment. It's not so much a beverage as it is a test of endurance. You swallow, and the aftertaste lingers in your mouth like you've just kissed a barrel of rotten fruit and old socks. If there's one thing medieval ale has going for it, it's the fact that it's strong. The alcohol content is high enough to make you forget that you're probably drinking something that was brewed last month by a guy who thought fermentation was just a fancy word for letting things rot in a corner. It's not a drink you savor, it's a drink you endure until you either pass out or decide that even the terrible taste can't outweigh the pleasant sensation of not being sober anymore. The texture is another thing entirely. You were expecting something liquid, but this ale is thick, almost like someone decided to turn soup into a drinkable substance. It sloshes around in your tankard with the heft of something that's been sitting around for far too long, and you start to wonder if the mug itself has more character than the liquid inside. The foam on top doesn't even foam properly. It just kind of sits there, like it knows it's just the last vestige of something that tried, but failed to be refreshing. You raise the tankard to your lips, trying to drink it with dignity, but there's no dignity to be had. The whole experience is like eating a soggy loaf of bread with a hint of fermented despair. As you sip your ale, you notice a few other patrons around you nursing their own tankards with the same grim determination. No one looks particularly thrilled about it. They don't take joyful sips or revel in the taste. In fact, their expressions are more akin to someone who's just been told that they've won a lifetime supply of something terrible, like sardines in a can, or a monthly subscription to the crushing disappointment of Ale Club. Yet they drink. They drink like it's their duty, like they're fulfilling some ancient sacred ritual where you can't be a true peasant unless you have at least 3 mugs of this sludgy concoction every night. Maybe it's the sense of community, or maybe it's the undeniable fact that this is the only option on the menu. But whatever it is, you're in it now. You look over at the innkeeper, who's somehow pouring even more of this concoction into a man's mug with the kind of dead-eyed professionalism that suggests he's been doing this for far too long. It's clear that in this era, ale isn't something you drink for enjoyment. It's a means to an end. It's sustenance, it's a coping mechanism, and, perhaps most importantly, it's a way to forget the fact that the day has likely been filled with the same misery you're now drinking to escape. And then there's the fact that, well, it gets the job done. After a few more gulps, you start feeling it, a pleasant warmth creeping through your body. The edges of your vision blur just enough that the room doesn't seem so small anymore. Maybe, just maybe, the furniture is a little less uncomfortable. You're a little less concerned about the smell of wet fur and damp wool. The laughter around you becomes more infectious, less like a forced, nervous chuckle, and more like genuine mirth, albeit a bit slurred. By the time your tankard is empty, you're starting to feel like a new person. Maybe the ale isn't so bad after all. Maybe it's not meant to be enjoyed in the traditional sense. Maybe it's just meant to be survived. And if you can survive this ale, you might just be able to survive the night. But don't worry, you'll probably regret it by morning. As you're sitting there, trying to decide if the ale is giving you a headache or just a strange sense of impending doom, you realize there's some entertainment happening. A jester in ragged clothes is hopping around, making faces that are more horrifying than funny. His jokes are about as sharp as a butter knife, and yet the crowd's eating it up. They laugh so hard you wonder if they've just discovered humor or if they've just had one too many ales. Either way, it's best to just nod along and hope no one notices you're not quite as amused. The jester's act is, well, it's an act, but it's less comedic genius and more, I'm doing my best, okay? He's leaping around with exaggerated flourishes, making faces that could either be interpreted as slapstick or a warning sign that he might need medical attention. His outfit, which is a patchwork of mismatched fabrics and fading colors, doesn't help. It's more frayed than fun, and you suspect that even the jester himself might be wondering if it's time to quit the whole entertainment thing and start selling stale bread by the fire instead. The crowd is another story altogether. They're laughing so loudly you start questioning if they even know what they're laughing at. It's like they're all in on an inside joke that you've missed, but it's not even funny enough for them to explain. One of them slaps the person next to them so hard on the back that it's a wonder they don't fall off their chair, and then, to your shock, the person who got slapped laughs too. Is that how you're supposed to laugh in this place, with wild abandon and a total disregard for the absurdity of it all? If so, you're clearly not drinking enough. You try to focus on the jester's performance, but the more you watch, the more you start to feel like you're stuck in some kind of medieval fever dream. He pulls out a small puppet from his ragged belt, a puppet that looks like it's seen better days, probably around the same time that rats last made it their home. It's the kind of puppet that, if it were in a modern context, would be tossed out immediately and replaced with something more, well, sanitary. But here, in the tavern, the puppet is a hit. The jester makes it dance around with exaggerated gestures, and the crowd eats it up, clapping along to its every move as if it's a new form of entertainment they've never seen before. The puppet doesn't even look remotely lifelike. It just kind of flops around like it's been sewn together by someone with a genuine disregard for symmetry. And yet, the applause rings out. The puppet is probably the best thing they've seen all week. A woman in the corner, clearly having one too many ales, suddenly starts clapping in time with the puppet's awkward jig. She's so loud that the jester notices her and throws in a particularly bad pun, something about being as stiff as the puppet's joints. This causes the crowd to erupt into the kind of laughter you can only get from too much alcohol and too little sense. The laughter is contagious, and soon you're awkwardly trying to suppress a chuckle, because if they're laughing, maybe you're missing something important. Maybe there's a secret world of comedy that you just don't understand, one where bad puns and shaky puppets are the height of intellectual discourse. A man nearby, whose face is already red from ale and exertion, shouts out, "Tell another one," and you're pretty sure he's on his third tankard of whatever mystery brew they've been serving tonight. The jester, who's probably more surprised by the request than anyone else, complies, and suddenly he's off again, frenzied movements, bad puns and all. The crowd laughs harder, which makes you question everything you thought you knew about humor. You sit back in your uncomfortable seat, realizing that this is it. This is entertainment in the medieval world. No slick comedy clubs, no Netflix specials, just a jester, a puppet, and an audience with a lot of ale and very few inhibitions. And somehow, despite everything, it works. Maybe it's the desperation for any form of distraction from the harshness of medieval life. Maybe it's because, in a world full of mud, disease, and endless work, a laugh is one of the few things people can hold on to, even if that laugh comes from the most questionable source. So you nod along with the crowd, forcing a smile and half-heartedly clapping when appropriate. Maybe, just maybe, you'll understand it all by the end of the night. Or maybe you'll just leave with a headache, a newfound appreciation for modern entertainment, and a story about how you sat through the most bizarre performance of your life. Either way, at least you're part of the experience. And at this point, that's really all you can ask for. You glance around and notice something unsettling. No one seems to be cleaning anything. The floors are covered in layers of filth, with footprints so caked on that they've probably become part of the decor. A rat scurries by, possibly eyeing your meal, but you're too tired to care. The fact that this place doesn't seem to have any sanitation systems, no sinks, no soap, feels less like a quirk of history and more like a bold social experiment on how much filth the human body can actually tolerate before it revolts. It's hard to avoid noticing the sticky patches beneath your feet as you shuffle through the tavern. What is that? Ale? Mud? Some unidentifiable substance that was once food but is now just a stain on the floor? Honestly, it's anyone's guess. The entire place is a study in neglect, but it's the charm of it that makes people keep coming back. After all, who wants a squeaky clean tavern when you can have something with character? And by character, we mean layers of grime that may or may not have historical significance. As your eyes wander further, you start to notice more details. The walls, which were probably once a shade of brown, are now a mottled patchwork of spilled drinks, food crumbs, and the occasional mysterious smear that you really don't want to investigate too closely. The beams overhead are so low that you have to duck every time you stand up, but honestly, you're more worried about the dangling bits of dust and cobwebs that seem to be the only thing holding the structure together. You wonder if it's less a building and more of an ongoing experiment to see how long a wooden structure can survive in an environment that would make even the hardiest mold reconsider its life choices. And then there's the smell. It's not just the stale ale or the damp wool of the patrons' cloaks. No, it's something deeper, something that lingers in the very air, something that can only be described as the scent of humanity in its most primal form. You try to breathe through your mouth, but it's futile. The odors are persistent, following you like a cloud of regret. It's the scent of leather that hasn't been treated since before the Black Plague, the wet animal fur of unwashed coats, the faint smell of something that was once meat, but now just exists as a memory of better days. As you sit back down, a patron nearby coughs so violently that it echoes through the tavern. The cough is wet, the kind of cough that suggests the person has been carrying some form of respiratory affliction for a while, maybe a few days, maybe a few weeks. You don't know whether to be concerned or impressed by their sheer resilience in the face of such obvious health risks. Either way, it's not the time for a deep dive into medieval medicine, so you just return to your drink, hoping it'll somehow help. In fact, you can't help but wonder, how do people live like this? The lack of basic hygiene is staggering. There's no washing of hands before eating, no cleansing of dishes, just a perpetual cycle of filth and neglect. A glance toward the bar reveals the innkeeper wiping a tankard with a rag that looks like it's been used for everything except cleaning. It's more of a tool for spreading germs than actually removing them. Still, no one seems to mind. After all, this is how things have always been, and it's not like anyone has any other options. Who's going to open a new tavern with better hygiene standards when this one is doing just fine? Thank you very much. It's only when a rat scurries across the counter, its beady eyes briefly meeting yours as if challenging you to a duel, that you realize this is all part of the charm. It's the dirty, gritty, chaotic energy that makes medieval taverns so, well, memorable. There's something almost poetic about it, the way everyone's just getting by, the way they've learned to embrace the grime as part of their daily life. Sure, it's not sanitary, but it's real. So you take a deep breath, adjust your expectations, and remind yourself that you're part of history now. If you're lucky, you'll leave with nothing more than a hangover and a new perspective on what it means to survive in a world where soap is considered a luxury, and the idea of clean hands is just a distant dream. So you're hungry, right? You're trying to pretend you've gotten used to the ale's taste, but now your stomach is growling. You glance over at the cauldron hanging by the fire, its contents bubbling and hissing. It looks like a stew, but it also looks like the kind of thing that could kill a modern stomach in seconds. Who knows what's actually in it? Mystery meat? Maybe. Some stale bread? Certainly. That oddly greenish substance in the corner? Best not to ask. The scent is, well, it's not exactly appetizing. It's like someone threw together all the leftover ingredients from a week's worth of meals, burnt bits of meat, wilted vegetables, and whatever else they could find. The smell is almost as overwhelming as the noise in the tavern, mixing with the musty air and the lingering fumes of ale. It's a strange combination of burnt, sour, and faintly sour. The smell seems to come in waves, 1 minute faint, the next so strong it makes your stomach do an involuntary backflip. You've heard stories about medieval stew. They say it's the ultimate test of survival, a dish that could sustain you through the hardest of days, or in some cases, just make you question your will to live. The tavern keeper is stirring the pot with a long wooden spoon, the kind of spoon that's probably seen more unsanitary places than you'd care to know about. And yet, people are lining up at the counter, shoveling their mugs full of the sludgy, murky concoction. A man next to you takes a deep, satisfied sip and then smacks his lips with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for a 5-star meal. You stare at him, genuinely perplexed. How could anyone enjoy this? Your turn comes. The innkeeper ladles out a generous portion, and you stare down at your bowl. The liquid is a dull brown, too thick to be soup, but too watery to be something that could reasonably be called stew. You poke at the surface with your spoon, half expecting it to protest. The first few bites are purely mechanical, swallowing because you have to, not because you want to. You try not to think about what's actually in it. That greenish lump, maybe it's some kind of overripe vegetable, or maybe it's the beginning stages of some sort of fungal infection. The meat? Well, let's just say it's probably not beef, pork, or chicken. It has that unmistakable texture of something that might have been alive at some point, but probably isn't anymore. Still, you're hungry. The stew has a way of growing on you. It's thick enough to coat your stomach, heavy enough to fill you up, and probably just the thing to take that edge off your ale-fueled headache. And there's something oddly comforting about it. The consistency, the warmth, the fact that it doesn't require any effort to chew. You stir your bowl and sigh, contemplating the strange, almost sad comfort that comes from a meal like this. It's the kind of meal that doesn't need seasoning because it's already too much. The flavors are muddled and overpowering, like a mishmash of whatever was available at the time. Tough bits of meat, vegetables that had been sitting out too long, and spices that may or may not have been added to mask the overall lack of freshness. In some ways, it's perfect for this moment. You're not here for gourmet dining. You're here for survival. The stew isn't about taste. It's about sustenance. It's the kind of meal you eat because you have no other choice, because there's nothing else to fill your belly, and you've already committed to this strange, unsanitary evening. Every bite is a reminder of how far you've fallen from modern comforts, a reminder that no one cares about the presentation, the freshness, or even the origins of your food when you're this deep into the medieval grind. But you eat it anyway. You finish the bowl, mostly out of obligation, and then shove the spoon into the bowl with a resigned sigh. The stew has done its job. You're full, for better or for worse, and your stomach is at least distracted from the swirling chaos of your thoughts. It may not be elegant, it may not be safe, but at this moment you realize this is medieval dining at its finest, and it's a lot more than just food. It's part of the experience. Of course, no tavern night is complete without a good old-fashioned brawl. The fight starts with a lot of shouting and the sound of wooden tankards crashing against the floor. But instead of fists flying, it's mostly a flurry of slapping and stumbling. You'd think a medieval bar fight would be all bare-knuckled fury, but it's actually more like a disorienting, drunken game of tag, just with more yelling and less coordination. It's comical, tragic, and ultimately inevitable. It begins with the kind of argument that only seems to exist in places like this. Someone's been accused of cheating at dice, or maybe someone else looked at their neighbor's mug too long. It's hard to tell. All you know is that suddenly, the tension in the air grows thick enough to cut with a dull knife. The conversation that was once filled with casual complaints about taxes or crops turns into an all-out shouting match between two peasants, their words slurring and their faces flushed with too much ale. Before you know it, one of them is shoving the other, and the crowd around them starts cheering as if this is some kind of sporting event. But this is not the high-speed, bare-knuckle brawls you might expect from knights or hardened warriors. No, this is a medieval bar fight, which means it's more about chaos than technique. One of the men, clearly the more intoxicated of the two, raises a fist, but instead of landing a punch, he swings with the accuracy of someone who's never seen a fight in their life. His arm flies forward, and instead of connecting with his opponent's face, it swings wildly into a nearby table, knocking over a tankard of ale that splashes onto the floor. This causes an immediate uproar of laughter from the surrounding crowd, mostly because it's the funniest thing they've seen all night. It's like watching a bear try to box a rabbit, awkward, clumsy, and completely off target. The fight then turns into a bizarre dance of stumbling and slapping, with both men alternating between raising their arms as if to strike, then lowering them in what could only be described as a slow-motion shrug. They lunge at each other, miss, and crash into tables, toppling benches as they struggle for balance. Meanwhile, other tavern goers shout, "Take him down," or "Give him a good slap," in a tone of mock seriousness that makes it hard to take any of this seriously. The more they try to punch, the less they actually connect, as if their hands are simply too drunk to function properly. One man in the crowd, perhaps the only one still sober enough to recognize how absurd this all is, tries to break up the scuffle by grabbing one of the combatants from behind. But this only results in more chaos, as the person trying to intervene gets pulled into the madness, and suddenly there are 3 men flailing around, all knocking into each other like a series of poorly executed dominoes. The first few punches land, kind of, but more often than not, the real damage comes from the accidental collisions with furniture or the random elbows that somehow find their mark. It's slapstick comedy at its finest. The tavern's other patrons, now fully invested in the spectacle, begin chanting things like, "Fight, fight, fight," and give him the old 1-2, like they have somehow stumbled upon a public execution rather than an incoherent, drunken slapfest. But then the fight comes to a halting pause, just as quickly as it started. The 2 men, now exhausted from the clumsy dance, stagger back, looking bewildered, as if they've both just realized they've been fighting over something incredibly insignificant. There's a moment of silence, and then the entire tavern bursts into laughter again. One of the men, wiping his brow, slaps the other on the back and says, "Good show." The fight is over, not with a dramatic finish, but with a shared moment of realization that no one knows why they were fighting in the first place. You sit there, trying to process the chaos, and find yourself wondering if this was really the highlight of the night. You can't help but chuckle, because despite all the violence, it's the least violent fight you've ever seen. But in a medieval tavern, that's probably about as good as it gets. So you raise your tankard, nodding as if to acknowledge the strange ritual of tavern life. After all, a little slap here and there is just part of the charm. There's a moment of silence, followed by the sound of feet slapping against the floor. Is it a dance? It's a dance, of sorts. A group of peasants have decided that now's the time to show off their moves, and while they might think they're nailing it, what they're actually doing is creating an intricate series of awkward lunges and wild twirls. No one's quite sure what the choreography is supposed to represent, but everyone's having a great time in their own, slightly terrifying way. The first thing you notice is the enthusiasm. It's contagious. They're not dancing because they know how. They're dancing because they think they're supposed to. It starts with one man, let's call him Gregor, who raises his hands as though he's about to embrace the entire room. The crowd gasps in awe, possibly because no one expected him to be this dramatic, or maybe they're just relieved that he's not trying to start a fight. Gregor twirls, and for a moment it's almost graceful, until he stumbles and collides with the woman next to him, who's wearing a dress that's probably seen better days. She staggers, and in a move that could only be described as desperately trying not to fall, she does the exact opposite, flying backward into a bench, sending several tankards of ale crashing to the floor. The entire tavern laughs, but it's not the cruel laughter of mockery. It's more of a shared understanding that at any moment, everything could go terribly wrong, and in this case, it already has. But still, they keep dancing. Gregor recovers like it's all part of the plan and does what can only be described as a flourish. There's no rhythm, no beat, just a lot of jerky movements that suggest he might be trying to start a new form of interpretive dance, or he's just really bad at staying upright. His arms flail, his feet slip, and you can see the concentrated effort in his face. He's trying to be graceful, but really, he's just one step away from a full-on pratfall. Then, the next brave soul joins in, a woman named Edith, who's been watching with a smile so wide that her cheeks must hurt. She steps forward, and with the conviction of someone who believes their feet have the rhythm of an angel, she immediately trips over her own shoe. Instead of acknowledging the mishap, she decides to roll with it and turns the stumble into what can only be described as an elegant spin. The crowd roars with approval. But this doesn't feel like actual praise. It's more like relief. Relief that the spectacle is continuing and that no one has collapsed in a heap yet. As more peasants join in, the dance becomes less of a coordinated effort and more of a chaotic collective improvisation. There are no rules, no patterns, just a flurry of legs and arms in what can only be described as movement in the most abstract sense. One man, clearly more intoxicated than the others, begins to hop around, and his hops start turning into what can only be described as attempts at cartwheels. None of them are successful, of course. He ends up toppling into a pile of hay bales, which everyone laughs at. Even the hay bales seem to be laughing. At this point, the crowd is so caught up in the madness that no one can remember how this all started. Is it still dancing? Or is it just an excuse to flail around in public without judgment? You can't be sure, but the energy is infectious. People are clapping along, some even trying to join in with their own awkward versions of the steps, if you can even call them steps. A few women, their faces flushed with excitement and the occasional pint of ale, step forward and start doing a kind of rhythmic stomping that vaguely resembles an Irish jig, except with no rhythm, no coordination, and way too much enthusiasm. They bump into each other, laugh, and keep going as if the entire thing is the greatest performance ever staged. By now, you realize that this isn't about skill. It's not about impressing anyone, and it's definitely not about creating something beautiful. It's about being alive in this moment, in this tavern, with these people. The dance, though awkward and chaotic, is a shared experience. It's a moment of freedom in a world where the mundane and the grim are the norm. There's something deeply human about it, the way everyone has thrown their inhibitions to the wind and simply joined in. And maybe that's what makes it so special. Eventually, the dancing slows. The bodies, once full of frenetic energy, now sag with exhaustion. Gregor, his arms hanging limply at his sides, looks around searching for validation. Edith, still smiling despite the ache in her feet, catches her breath. The crowd too begins to dissipate, but not without giving them one last round of applause. It wasn't a perfect dance, but in this place, at this time, it was the best anyone could have hoped for. And as the last notes of the night play out in the air, you realize they might not have known what they were doing, but in their own chaotic way, they were alive. You finally get the attention of the innkeeper, who looks like he's been dealing with drunk customers for centuries. He's grumpy, sarcastic, and doesn't seem to have much interest in your needs unless they involve paying him money. When you ask for more bread, He gives you a look that says, "You came here for bread? In a medieval tavern? Have you lost your mind?" He's clearly been doing this for so long that he's practically an expert in both brewing beer and wielding passive-aggressive commentary. You notice that the innkeeper's posture is one of someone who's seen it all. He's not quite slouching, but he's got the air of someone who has earned the right to lean a little, because what else is there to do after spending years staring at the same filthy walls, serving the same people night after night? His shirt's a bit too big, his hair a bit too greasy, and his apron looks like it's been through more spills than a clumsy jester. He stands behind the bar like it's a fortress, casting occasional glances toward the chaotic crowd, as if daring anyone to challenge him. And you get the sense that if you did, he'd just raise an eyebrow and let the fight sort itself out. When you ask him for a drink, he doesn't even bother to take your order. He just fills a tankard without a word. You could ask for a top-shelf vintage, or even some clean water, and he'd still hand you the same thing, a thick, brownish brew that might have come out of the same cauldron they used to boil shoes. As he hands it over, he mutters, "Don't say I didn't warn you." And with that, you're left with a tankard that's less a beverage and more a small act of medieval defiance. The innkeeper's lack of enthusiasm is almost admirable in its consistency. You'd think that after centuries of serving peasants, nobles, and the occasional knight who's fallen on hard times, he'd have developed some level of customer service. But no, the man's entire existence seems to be based on the assumption that you're lucky to even be allowed in his establishment, and you should probably stop asking for things like extra napkins or a clean mug. If he notices someone wiping their hands on the tablecloth, he'll scowl but make no attempt to stop them. After all, that is what being an innkeeper in the medieval world is all about, letting people live out their disgusting little lives as long as they pay the bill. When a customer tries to strike up a conversation, the innkeeper responds with the kind of short, clipped sentences that suggest he's more interested in cleaning the bar than entertaining his clientele. "What's that you say? Your cousins come to visit and you want a room for the night? Well, good for you. The hayloft's free. Don't expect a pillow, though." He might offer a grin, but it's less friendly and more, "I've heard all your stories before, and I'm definitely not impressed." And let's not forget the bread. When you ask for a second loaf, he stares at you for a beat, as though you've just requested a feast fit for a king. The bread, stale bread, is clearly the least of his concerns, but he hands it over anyway, like he's doing you a huge favor. "There, happy now?" he says, before turning away with a sigh that could have been lifted from the world-weary sigh of someone who's been a part-time therapist and full-time bread dispenser for far too long. Despite his gruff exterior, though, there's something undeniably comforting about the innkeeper. Maybe it's the sheer consistency of his miserable attitude. He's never going to be a source of warm, fuzzy hospitality, but at least you can count on him to be, well, reliably miserable. In a world of uncertainty, his sarcasm is like a rock, cold, unmovable, and oddly reassuring. After all, in this tavern, it's not about the cleanliness or the food quality or the service. It's about survival. And the innkeeper, with his dry humor and lack of pretense, might just be the one person in this place who's not pretending. You finish your drink and stare at the half-empty bread basket, wondering if you'll get another loaf or if you'll just have to suffer with what's left. The innkeeper, without a single word, seems to know that you're already resigned to your fate, and that, in itself, is oddly comforting. Maybe that's the point of this whole medieval tavern experience. Not the food, the drink, or even the entertainment, but the quiet, grumpy acknowledgement that despite everything, you're here, and so is he, and at least one of you is still standing. There's always that guy, the one sitting in the corner, staring into his mug with an air of mystery so thick it could suffocate a house cat. No one knows his name, and everyone's too scared to ask. He doesn't talk, he just looks deep into the flames as if they're revealing the meaning of life. His leather clothes are a little too new for someone in a place like this, and you can't shake the feeling that he's involved in something not entirely legal. Does he have a secret life? Probably. Is he going to murder someone tonight? Maybe. You can't help but glance over at him every now and then, though you try to do it casually. Pretend you're not interested in the mysterious man who's clearly up to something big. He's sitting alone, just out of reach of the noisy tavern crowd, his back slightly turned as if he's intentionally keeping to the shadows. The firelight flickers on his face, casting shadows that make his expression seem even more intense. His gaze never leaves the flames, as if he's contemplating some ancient mystery or brooding about an existential crisis that can only be solved by being surrounded by people who are half drunk and oblivious. You can't help but wonder what he's thinking. Maybe he's got a secret past, one that involves high-stakes gambling, secretive meetings with shady characters, or possibly in something darker. Maybe he's some kind of outlaw, a fugitive with a price on his head, or perhaps an assassin on the run from the law. It's hard to say. The truth is, he looks like a man who's just been through something, a man who's seen things, done things, and now sits here in the corner of this dank tavern, nursing a drink like it's his last. His clothes, too pristine for this place, are worn as if they were made for someone who spends their time either hunting down enemies or riding through dangerous, untamed lands. The quality of his gear suggests that, whatever his line of work, he's not scraping by. As you try to read him from across the room, the tension is palpable. You can't help but feel like he's aware of your gaze, even though his attention remains fixed on the fire. What is it about him? Why does everyone instinctively steer clear of him? Maybe it's the stillness about him, the way he seems detached from the chaotic, drunken energy of the tavern. Or maybe it's just the fact that he looks like the kind of man who could disappear into the shadows at any moment, leaving nothing but a trail of mystery behind him. Every now and then, he shifts his position slightly, as if surveying the room with a knowing glance, though he never looks directly at anyone. It's a look that says, I could be anywhere, doing anything, but I'm here, for now. It's unsettling, really. His presence is like a slow burn that just refuses to flicker out. Even the tavern's regulars seem to give him a wide berth, as if subconsciously acknowledging that to approach him might lead to some form of danger or discomfort. And then there's the silence. The longer he sits there, the more you begin to wonder. Is he just waiting for something to happen? Or is he just here to blend in with the noise, to watch the drama unfold without ever participating in it? A part of you hopes that he'll stay in his corner, unnoticed, because there's something about him that seems almost inevitable, like a storm on the horizon, just waiting to burst. You get the feeling that this man is a stranger, not just in the tavern, but in time, as if he's arrived from some place far away, not just geographically, but in the timeline of this world. And for all you know, maybe he's not just some grumpy wanderer. Maybe he's someone who could change everything with a single word, a single action. Maybe he's the kind of man who leaves an impression so lasting that the tavern's stories will echo with his name long after he's gone. But as the night wears on, he doesn't move. He doesn't speak. He just watches. And you're left wondering, who is he really? And what, exactly, is he waiting for? You thought you ordered a nice, safe bowl of stew, but what you got instead is a bowl of something that looks like it was alive 2 minutes ago. It's still twitching. And no, the innkeeper didn't offer you any kind of menu. He just gave you something out of the pot and sent you on your way. You try not to think about the possible creature it came from, and instead focus on the fact that your stomach is now beginning to stage a protest against the decision. The stew sits before you like a poorly executed science experiment, lumps of mystery meat floating in a broth that could have been made by throwing the remnants of the last few days into a cauldron and praying for the best. There's a questionable greenish hue to the liquid, and the vegetables are a sad, limp excuse for what might have once been something you could recognize. A potato? Maybe. But it's now so mushy it looks like it could be some sort of alien artifact. The smell hits you next, half pleasant, half suspicious. It's the kind of aroma that might trick your brain into thinking it's food until you look at it too long. You try to poke at the stew with your spoon, and as you do, something moves beneath the surface. It's like a horror movie in slow motion. Your brain is frantically trying to piece together what exactly is happening, but there's no good explanation. Is that a piece of meat still twitching? Or did the stew somehow evolve while it was sitting on the stove? You're not sure, and you really don't want to know. But there it is. Your spoon suddenly makes contact with something alive in your meal. The movement is so subtle, you almost convince yourself it was just the steam from the pot. Almost. Taking a deep breath, you consider the situation carefully. This isn't just a bad meal. This is medieval dining. There's no such thing as expectations here, just survival. You could try to flag down the innkeeper and complain, but based on his previous customer service skills, you're pretty sure he'd just look at you like you'd asked him to find the Holy Grail. So you do what anyone in your position would do. You take a bite. The first taste is shockingly unremarkable. It's like chewing on old leather soaked in broth, with the occasional surprise of a flavor that may or may not have once been edible. The meat is tough. Perhaps it was once a chicken, but it's been boiled into submission to the point that it might as well be a rubber boot. But here's the thing. You keep eating. You don't know why. It's like a compulsion, like your body is too tired to fight anymore, and your brain has decided that maybe it's better not to question the mystery meat. And then you notice the bread. The loaf is stale, so stale that it might have been used as a weapon during the last tavern brawl, but you tear off a chunk anyway. You dip it into the broth in a last-ditch effort to salvage some semblance of flavor. The bread becomes soggy almost immediately, falling apart in your hands, but you keep going. After all, it's food. Barely, but it's food. The worst part is that despite everything, you can't stop. The stew isn't good. It's barely food, really, but there's something about it that makes you keep shoveling it into your mouth. Maybe it's the sheer absurdity of the situation, how you went from thinking you'd get a simple bowl of stew to being confronted with a dish that looks like it should be sent to a research lab for study. Maybe it's the fact that the tavern is so crowded, the noise so constant, that you can't help but get swept up in it too. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the fact that you're so hungry that even this odd concoction is better than nothing. You push the bowl away, staring at the half-empty dish in front of you, wondering if you've just eaten something alive. The tavern is loud, the ale is making its rounds, and the innkeeper is shouting out orders. All around you, people are somehow managing to enjoy their own versions of medieval mystery meals. You're left wondering, is it the stew that's strange, or is it you who continues to eat it? You glance around, but no one else seems to mind. Everyone is too busy in their own little corner of the tavern, dancing, arguing, drinking, to notice your struggles with the dish of the day. So you take another bite, not because you want to, but because in the medieval world, sometimes you just have to keep eating, even if you have no idea what's on your plate. You're sitting there, wondering how the whole tavern can smell this bad, and then you remember bathing was not exactly an everyday thing in medieval times. Some people went months without a proper wash. Can you imagine that? The guy next to you is wearing the same socks from the beginning of the week. You can only hope the smell of burning meat in the fireplace is enough to cover up the other scents wafting through the room. It hits you all at once, the aroma of the place. It's like a combination of wet dog, stale sweat, and old leather. It's warm and damp, the kind of atmosphere that makes you feel like you're constantly covered in a thin layer of grime. You try to breathe through your mouth, but it doesn't help. You wonder, as you squirm uncomfortably on your creaky, wobbly bench, if it's socially acceptable to just leave right now and find a less scented environment. But no, you're committed now. You're part of this medieval madness. As you glance around, the truth dawns on you. These people are not just poor, they're really poor. And they're living in a time where running water is a luxury reserved for those with an impressive amount of wealth, or more likely, the ability to bribe someone with a strong back and a barrel. The idea of a nice, hot shower after a long day, soap suds gently massaging your scalp, is nothing but a dream. In fact, hygiene practices back then were less about cleanliness and more about survival. The man sitting next to you, who's wearing the same tunic he wore yesterday, and probably the day before that, seems completely unaware of the overwhelming stench of his own body. He scratches his beard, which has clearly been home to a small ecosystem for a while, and you think, that's it. I've seen enough. He doesn't even seem to notice the sweaty, oily sheen on his face, nor the way his clothes have hardened from days without a wash. His feet? Well, there's no way they're fresh. The smell of worn leather boots mixed with unwashed feet is enough to make you reconsider everything about medieval life. You can only hope his lack of awareness is contagious, or you're going to lose it entirely. And yet, this was normal. In the medieval era, bathing was considered more of a luxury than a necessity. In fact, many people thought too much water might open up your pores and let in disease, so they avoided baths as much as possible. If you were lucky, you might get a quick wash in a stream, or if you had some semblance of wealth, a quick dip in a communal bathhouse. But even then, the bathhouses were more about socializing than actual cleanliness. People sat in the same water, sometimes for hours, swirling around in filth, with no idea that they were actually making things worse. When you think about it, the whole concept of clean didn't really exist back then. The closest thing to hygiene was probably wiping yourself down with a damp cloth and hoping for the best. Soap? So that was a luxury reserved for those who could afford the time and materials. So for most people, freshness was relative. The best you could do was cover up the smell, whether with perfumes, herbs tucked under the armpits, or even the smell of last night's campfire still lingering in your clothes. Now, as you sit there, it's hard not to notice that everyone around you is in various stages of odor, but no one seems to care. The noise of the tavern drowns out your discomfort. There's laughter, shouting, the clink of tankards, the occasional thud of someone slipping on the floor after one too many ales. No one is even bothered by the thick, pungent air that hangs over the entire establishment like a heavy fog. It's all part of the experience. You quickly realize that in this moment, you are the outlier, the one who's hyper-aware of the fact that you just can't escape the smells of medieval living. You shift uncomfortably in your seat, wondering how you've managed to adapt this far. You can't help but envy modern life. Indoor plumbing, soap, and a shower at the end of the day suddenly seem like miracles. But as you look around the tavern, you can't help but laugh, because for all the discomfort, there's a certain gritty charm to it all. They may not have running water, but these people have survived worse. Plagues, famine, and a complete lack of deodorant. And here they are, laughing, living, and making the best of their very unsanitary circumstances. So you settle back in, take a sip of your questionable ale, and realize that, in the grand scheme of things, maybe the stink isn't the worst part of your experience tonight. After all, you're alive, you're part of history now, and at least you don't have to smell yourself. Romance in a medieval tavern is like a slow-motion car crash. You can't look away, but you really wish you could. There's a couple in the corner, whispering sweet nothings to each other, but the sweet part seems to be more about sharing half a tankard of ale and awkwardly adjusting their tunics every few seconds. You wonder if medieval courtship involved this much bodily contact, or if people just had to get really cozy because space was so limited. Personal space didn't exist, so it was basically an early version of Tinder, except you had to deal with the unpleasant side effects of communal living. The couple seems to be in their own little world, but you can't help but notice how close they are. They're practically sitting on top of each other, a fact made more apparent by the fact that the bench they've chosen seems only slightly larger than a plank of wood. It's a tight fit, and neither of them seems comfortable, but they're both too polite, or perhaps too drunk, to move. Every now and then, one of them will make an effort to pull away, only to end up leaning into the other again, as if their personal space has been swapped for no space at all. You watch as their arms and elbows clash in the cramped seat, like two people caught in a game of tug-of-war they didn't sign up for. And somehow, this physical closeness, rather than feeling like intimacy, just makes the whole thing seem incredibly awkward. You can't help but wonder what kind of rituals passed for romance back in medieval times. Were people actually this touchy-feely, or was it just a matter of survival? With the tavern so crowded, it must have been difficult to maintain any sort of personal boundaries, especially after a few too many mugs of ale. It's like everyone was forced into a kind of unspoken intimacy, where the boundaries of personal space didn't exist, and neither did the subtle art of not touching people you barely knew. In fact, the whole concept of personal space probably seemed like a foreign, almost laughable idea to medieval folk. So when it came to romance, the closer the better, especially when the option was either share a bench or stand in the cold. The couple's conversation, too, feels strangely public. No hushed tones, no whispers meant to stay private. They talk just loudly enough for you to overhear about the most mundane things imaginable, the weather, what they're having for supper tomorrow, and, interestingly, how long it's been since they last bathed. It's a fascinating display of medieval courtship, if courtship is what you can call it. Maybe it's just a survival tactic in a world where everyone is jammed together in tiny spaces, forced to make do with what little room they have. Meanwhile, a man and woman a few seats down from you exchange glances over a tankard of ale, and suddenly the game begins again. The guy shifts uncomfortably, moving a little closer to her, leaning in to speak. His arm brushes against hers, and it's not clear whether this is a calculated move or just a simple accident. You can practically see the wheels turning in his head. Is this flirting, or am I just getting elbowed because it's so crowded? You almost feel sorry for them. The whole thing is so transparent, like an awkward first date, but with the added tension of being surrounded by a room full of people who will almost certainly end up judging your every move. But maybe that's the beauty of medieval romance. There's no space for subtlety, no room for slow builds or quiet glances. It's all in your face, all of it happening at once, whether you want it to or not. You're forced to act, to be in the moment, because there's no hiding in the shadows when everyone's just a few inches away from you. The lack of space makes every interaction feel immediate, every touch deliberate, and yet, somehow, it's all just a little bit wrong. Still, the couple in the corner doesn't seem to mind. They're leaning into the discomfort, their faces flushed with the ale and maybe the proximity. They share another awkward laugh, then stare into each other's eyes for a brief, strange moment of connection. They're probably already planning to get married, or at least share a few more awkward dances later in the evening. In this tavern, romance is messy, crowded, and definitely not private, but at least it's real. When you think about medieval taverns, you imagine a lot of laughing, but what you don't realize is that every moment of that laughter is probably fueled by a drinking game. Some brave or stupid souls are challenging each other to strange, horrifying games where the only real rule is to drink more than the person sitting across from you, whether you want to or not. These games get chaotic fast, and the only winner is the one who can still stand at the end of it. Spoiler, it's never you. At first, it seems harmless enough. A couple of guys at a nearby table are making exaggerated gestures, clearly preparing for some sort of challenge. One of them stands up and slams his tankard on the table, declaring a challenge to anyone who dares face him. His voice is loud, filled with bravado, and maybe the ale has something to do with that too. "A toast to bravery," he shouts, his voice slurring slightly. You glance over, and before you can even finish taking a sip of your own ale, another man is already accepting. The stakes seem low at first. A few rounds of this, and it'll all be over. What could go wrong? But the rules, oh, the rules. It's not like any game you've played before. One person takes a drink, then the other takes a drink, and then they both take another drink. It's almost like a bizarre version of rock, paper, scissors. But instead of hand gestures, you're downing more and more ale, faster than you thought possible. Soon, the drinking is less about the competition and more about who can stay conscious long enough to finish. The crowd around them is cheering, hooting, and hollering with each gulp. Some people are leaning in, shouting encouragement, while others are just standing there, waiting for the inevitable collapse. The tension builds with every sip, because you know deep down that this whole thing could end with someone losing their lunch, or worse. You try to ignore the sounds of sloshing ale and the occasional gagging noise coming from the participants, but it's impossible. One of the men, already several tankards in, begins to sway slightly as his face turns a shade of red that can only mean trouble. The guy across from him, though equally as drunk, looks determined to win. The crowd is practically on the edge of their seats now, waiting for that moment when the first contestant finally falls over, face first into the muck of the floor. It's inevitable. The question isn't whether it will happen, it's just when. And then it happens. The man you were sure would win stumbles backward, his hands scrambling for something to steady himself as his tankard flies out of his hand, splashing the entire table. The room erupts into wild laughter, but there's no sense of shame, no embarrassment on his part. It's all part of the game. There's no losing in this contest. There's only survival, and survival means getting so drunk that it doesn't matter if you fall face first into your food. Meanwhile, the game continues at other tables. You see other men eyeing their tankards with determination, as if they too are playing some unspoken, never-ending contest of who can hold their liquor best. A particularly loud group in the back begins chanting something you can't quite make out, and before long, a new game is started. One where the loser has to drink from someone else's tankard, or worse, from the same tankard that just made the rounds. The smell of stale ale, spilled beer, and regret hangs in the air, adding to the already unpleasant stench of unwashed bodies. The problem with these games is simple. They are never really about the game itself. They are about surviving the night, pushing yourself past what your body can handle, all for the approval of the people around you. And as each round gets worse, the stakes get higher. The crowd loves it, egging on the participants like they're gladiators in an arena, except the only weapons they're wielding are their ability to drink without passing out. And yet, no matter how much you watch, you know one thing: you're not going to join in. Sure, the laughter is infectious, and the crowd's energy is enough to make you think, just one round, what's the worst that could happen? But deep down, you know the answer: everything. Because in these medieval drinking games, the only real prize is that you'll wake up tomorrow morning with a pounding headache, surrounded by strangers who have forgotten everything that happened the night before, and you'll probably be a little too embarrassed to ask what exactly happened to your dignity. The mood takes a sudden shift when someone coughs, and the entire room goes eerily silent. It's not just any cough, it's the cough of doom. Everyone starts shifting uncomfortably in their seats, like the plague is going to crawl out of the shadows and claim them all. It's a real threat, though. A few weeks ago, the last person who coughed in the tavern was found to have, well, let's just say they weren't around anymore. Now everyone's looking over their shoulder, pretending not to panic. Maybe you should just head for the door. The coughing doesn't stop. It's not a regular, "I've had a little too much dust" kind of cough. This one is deep, racking, the kind that rattles the bones. You can feel the tension rise like a fog in the room. No one says anything, but the look on everyone's face says it all. Oh no, not again. The tavern's patrons shift uneasily, eyeing the door, then glancing at the sickly figure in the corner, who's now trying, unsuccessfully, to stifle another hacking fit. The innkeeper, who's seen his fair share of trouble, doesn't even bother with a snarky remark. Instead, He just wipes his hands on his apron and stares at the coughing man with an intensity that could burn through stone. It's hard to ignore the irony. A few hours ago, this place was full of life, laughter, and drunken revelry. But now it feels like a den of potential death. Everyone's trying to pretend like they're not worried, but the truth is they all know what's happening. The plague is just one bad cough away. You know the stories, the ones that circulate between taverns and inns in whispered tones, how a single sneeze or a cough from someone who's already infected can bring ruin, how entire families, entire villages can disappear overnight. The tavern's patrons are, for the most part, survivors. They've seen the chaos, the carnage. Some of them were even lucky enough to live through the last outbreak. The ones who weren't lucky enough to survive are the ones who tend to go quiet whenever a cough interrupts the revelry. You start thinking about your own health, and suddenly you feel that subtle tightening in your chest. Was that a tickle in your throat? No, it's nothing. But still, you find yourself involuntarily rubbing your hands together, as if washing them in your mind will somehow keep you safe. And yet, the cough continues, echoing through the room with every hack. You can see a few patrons eyeing the door, like they're just waiting for the moment when they'll bolt. The cougher, still oblivious to the increasing discomfort around him, wipes his mouth with the back of his hand and takes another swig of his ale, as if nothing is amiss. But the tension is palpable. The game of survival has just started again. You catch a glimpse of a man on the other side of the room, his eyes wide, watching the sickly figure like a hawk. He's already thinking about the exit, even if he doesn't realize it. The thing is, there's no easy way out of this situation. You could leave, but if this man has already caught whatever's going around, then the damage may already be done. It's not like they have quarantine zones in the medieval world. It's just, everyone sharing the same air, drinking the same ale, bumping into each other in tight corners and narrow spaces. Every breath is a gamble. You try to avoid making eye contact with anyone, hoping no one notices that your hand is shaking as you take another sip from your own mug. You can't help but wonder, how many of these people will be here tomorrow? In the corner, the coughing seems to have slowed, but you can't relax just yet. Not until that man leaves the tavern. You wait, every second dragging on longer than the last. Everyone's pretending to sip their drinks and laugh along with the noise, but inside, everyone is wondering the same thing. Will we all make it out of here tonight? It's a brutal game, this survival thing. One cough, one brush with the wrong person, and the next thing you know, your name might be added to the list of the plague's victims. So as the coughing continues to echo in the background, you find yourself secretly praying that you won't be the next to catch it. But hey, maybe you'll get lucky. It's all part of the medieval gamble, right? One of the stranger traditions in medieval taverns involves tavern games, most of which seem less like games and more like ways to slowly lose your dignity. There's a game where you have to throw rocks into a bucket. Simple enough, right? Well, there's also a 50% chance that one of those rocks will land on your foot, resulting in a full-blown panic about whether or not you've just broken something important. And don't even get started on the dice games. They're rigged, they're loud, and they'll leave you penniless and wondering how it all went so wrong. It starts innocently enough. A man near the fire starts a game of rock toss with his friends, and within seconds, a crowd has gathered. The rules are simple. You throw rocks into a wooden bucket. Whoever lands the most rocks in the bucket gets the bragging rights of the night. Sounds easy, right? Wrong. The first few rounds are fine, but then it becomes clear. You're not just playing for pride, you're playing for your very self-respect. It's not just about hitting the target, it's about not injuring yourself in the process. The rocks are heavy and unforgiving, and the bucket isn't exactly easy to hit. Each throw feels like a calculated risk. If you miss, you risk losing your dignity. If you hit the target, you risk stepping back and breaking a toe. It's one thing to lose a game of skill, but it's another thing entirely when the cost of your failure is potentially crippling pain. As the game goes on, it gets more competitive. The crowd starts to cheer for their favorites, and the man who has been winning so far has started getting too confident. His throws become increasingly wild, and there's a look in his eye that suggests he believes he can defy physics and land a rock with the precision of a skilled marksman. But that's when it happens. With one overzealous throw, the rock misses the bucket entirely and crashes to the floor right onto another player's foot. The scream that follows is pure, unfiltered agony. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifts. What was once a fun distraction has become a source of potential injury. You start to wonder if the game is worth it. But before you can reconsider, another round starts, and before long, you find yourself reaching for a rock, hoping you won't be the next casualty. Then there's the dice game. It's one of the loudest and most chaotic games in the tavern, and it doesn't take long before you realize that the dice are, for lack of a better word, rigged. You roll and pray, but the person managing the game has an uncanny ability to nudge the dice in just the right way so that you end up losing. The crowd cheers, and you watch in dismay as your hard-earned coin disappears into the hands of someone who's clearly playing with loaded dice. It's not just the money you lose, it's the piece of yourself you lose with it. The laughter around you becomes louder, and you start to feel the pressure of trying to prove that you can win. But every time you roll, the odds seem stacked against you. You can't help but think that maybe this is all a cruel joke. A game designed to make you feel like a fool, all for the amusement of the regulars who've seen it all before. In the end, you walk away empty-handed, trying to forget the stinging feeling of loss and the strange sense of humiliation that comes with participating in these so-called games. It's not just your money you've lost, it's your pride. The tavern is filled with the sound of laughter, but all you hear is the ringing in your ears from the heavy weight of defeat. And yet, as you sit down to nurse your drink and lick your wounds, you realize that these games are part of the experience. The point isn't really about winning, it's about being part of something larger than yourself. Whether you're throwing rocks or rolling dice, you're participating in the madness of the medieval tavern, where the stakes are low, but the losses, both financial and personal, can feel surprisingly high. A small group of musicians has begun playing in the corner. 2 guys with lutes, a woman with a flute, and a guy who's really into the tambourine. But you have to ask yourself, how much music can you take when it's essentially the soundtrack to an 8-hour tavern binge? The tunes are repetitive and off-key, the lyrics questionable, mostly about how much they love a good ale, and the whole vibe is a little too, we're just here to pass time because the plague won't kill us fast enough. At first, it's kind of charming, an innocent little distraction. The lutes strum their simple chords, the flute adds a high-pitched, almost whimsical note, and the tambourine guy is shaking his instrument with the enthusiasm of someone who just discovered rhythm last week. The music swells, and for a moment, you can almost pretend You're in some sort of medieval festival, maybe even a tavern where people are actually enjoying the music. You might even hum along to the familiar, repetitive tune, tapping your foot to the beat for about 2 minutes. But then it starts to sink in. The tunes aren't changing. The lute players are stuck in a loop, strumming the same 3 chords over and over, as if they're afraid to deviate from the comfortable, predictable formula. The flutist plays the same fluttering melody, with the occasional squeak when the notes get a bit too ambitious. And that tambourine, oh, the tambourine, it's like someone accidentally discovered it on the way to the inn and decided it was the perfect addition to this band. The constant jingle-jangle becomes more of an annoying companion than a musical instrument. It's almost like a background noise that's somehow stuck in your brain, forcing you to listen to the same clinking over and over, like a cat trying to get your attention by knocking things off the counter. The crowd doesn't seem to mind, though. In fact, they're actively cheering them on, applauding after every song like it's the most impressive thing they've heard all night. You catch a few patrons nodding their heads, a few slapping their knees in rhythm, and one particularly drunk woman even dancing around a table, completely unaware of the fact that her moves are closer to flailing than dancing. The musicians, encouraged by this, play on louder now, feeding off the energy of the crowd. But by the time they hit their 3rd or 4th round of the same tune, you start to feel like the music is not so much an entertainment choice as it is a reminder that time is passing. The plucking of the lute strings, the high whine of the flute, and the persistent shake of the tambourine almost become a soundtrack to your personal suffering. Each note is like a tiny hammer driving home the point that you're stuck in this tavern for the long haul, and the music is the least of your problems. As the night drags on, you find yourself wishing for something, anything different. A change in the song, a key, change, a new anything. But no, the band keeps playing, the same tune, the same rhythm, the same endless cycle. The words, when they finally emerge from the music, are always about ale and how much they love it. Oh, and how it makes life worth living. It's a catchy little ditty, sure, but after the 6th repeat, you're questioning if this song is really about beer or if it's about the deep, shared existential despair of being stuck in the same miserable tavern with a looped soundtrack to your downfall. And yet, somehow, you keep listening. The music doesn't get better. It doesn't change. It just is, a constant fixture in the tavern, like the grime on the floor or the smell of unwashed bodies. You know it's bad. You know it's repetitive. But somehow it becomes part of the experience. In the medieval world, this is what you have. No grand orchestras, no symphonies to lift your spirits, just a small band of musicians playing their hearts out, or maybe just their livers, considering the amount of ale they've consumed, to provide a soundtrack for the chaos around them. By the time they stop, you realize that you've lost track of time. Whether it's been minutes or hours, you're not sure anymore. But one thing is for certain, you will never think of tavern music the same way again. There's a cat in the corner of the tavern, lounging on a beam like it owns the place. It's not a cute, fluffy kitten. It's a scruffy beast that looks like it's fought in more bar brawls than you've had hot dinners. The cat surveys the room with a detached, almost disdainful look, like it's judging everyone's life choices and probably has more power than the innkeeper. It's the real authority here, and if you're smart, you'll avoid making eye contact, because it's about to be your new best friend whether you like it or not. The cat's eyes are narrow slits, its fur matted and greasy in a way that suggests it's had more than a few run-ins with tavern patrons who probably thought they could share their ale with it. But the cat is no fool. It knows its place, perched high up on that beam like it's untouchable, the silent ruler of this establishment. The moment you step in, it locks eyes with you, and you can't help but feel like it's sizing you up, assessing your worth in a single glance. It's not interested in your gold or your manners. It just wants to know if you're worthy of its time. If you're not, it'll let you know by ignoring you completely. If you are, though, well, good luck. You've just earned a feline sidekick who will follow you, meow at you, and judge your every move until you either get the hint or give it your leftovers. As you settle into your seat, you notice the way the cat moves, or more accurately, how it doesn't move. It's like it's a permanent fixture of the tavern, existing in the same space as the dust on the shelves or the smell of stale ale in the air. Yet when things start to get rowdy, the cat's behavior shifts. Suddenly it's alert, its tail flicking with a purpose as it watches the crowd like a hawk. You begin to wonder if it's actually in charge of the tavern. It's the only one who doesn't flinch when the room starts to get loud. In fact, it seems almost amused by the commotion, like it's seen this all before and knows exactly how it will play out. Then it happens. A brawl erupts in the corner, the kind of drunken, stumbling fight that always happens when too many people drink too much ale. The cat, without even bothering to move, narrows its eyes at the commotion. You can practically feel it thinking, this is getting out of hand. In an instant, the cat jumps down from the beam, its movements quick and graceful. It saunters across the floor, completely unfazed by the chaos around it, and takes its place in the middle of the action, sitting right between the combatants, staring them down. The tavern goes eerily silent for a moment, perhaps out of respect, or perhaps because everyone knows better than to challenge the cat's authority. With a casual flick of its tail, the cat watches the brawlers. They pause, suddenly unsure of what to do. You can see the realization dawning on their faces. The cat is not impressed. The fight dies down, almost. Immediately, and just as quickly, the cat turns around and saunters back to its perch, resuming its watch over the room. It has done its job, without a single meow, a single scratch, or even a hint of effort. The crowd, now quiet, exchanges nervous glances. It's clear that this is the real power in the tavern, the cat, an ancient, unspoken ruler of the tavern's chaotic ecosystem. It's not just a pet. It's the enforcer, the bouncer, and the moral compass, all rolled into one fluffy, indignant package. You might have thought the innkeeper held the reins here, but the truth is the cat is the one who really keeps things in line. The innkeeper's just there to serve the drinks. The cat is there to make sure no one forgets who's really in charge. And so, you finish your ale, keeping your distance, aware that this tavern, chaotic and strange as it is the cat's world. You're just living in it. If there's one thing medieval taverns do well, it's gossip. As you sip your ale, you can hear snippets of conversations where peasants talk about everything from the latest bad harvest to who's sleeping with whom. Spoiler, it's probably everyone, and no one is happy about it. The drama runs deep, especially since the village is small enough that everyone knows each other's business. You'll hear one person gossip about how the miller's wife might be a witch, and then another will casually mention that the blacksmith's son might have actually started the last fire that nearly burned the town down. So in short, it's like high school drama, but with worse hygiene and lower stakes. At first, you try to ignore it, the low hum of chatter that fills the tavern like a cloud of smoke. But then, as you settle in, you realize you're being pulled in, bit by bit. You overhear a man at the next table whispering to his companion about the local priest. You know, he's been acting funny lately, always walking around with that odd book, might be reading something, well, unholy. The other man leans in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I heard he's been seeing the miller's wife. You try to look away, but you can't help it. The idea of a scandal involving the village's holy man and the miller's wife is just too juicy to pass up. The tavern grows louder, and soon the conversation shifts. Another man joins in, slamming his mug on the table. And speaking of the miller's wife, he says, I heard she's been spotted talking to some stranger in the woods at night. They say he's got a bad reputation, but she's always too good for anyone to question. The group laughs, but there's a nervous edge to it. You can feel the tension in the room, like everyone is waiting for someone to make a mistake, waiting for the next piece of gossip to tumble out into the open. At another table, a woman lowers her voice as she tells her friend, You know, the blacksmith's son? I heard he was seen sneaking out in the middle of the night. Some say he's the one who started the fire last year, the one that nearly burned the town down. The friend gasps, leaning in, clearly hooked by the drama. But how could he? He's a good boy, the woman protests. The first one looks around suspiciously, lowering her voice even more. Good boy, maybe, but someone saw him sneaking around with a torch, and now the fire's gone, just like the evidence. As the night continues, the gossip grows darker, more intense. There's talk of strange happenings in the woods at night, rumors of a supposed witch living on the outskirts of town, and whispers of who might be the next to catch the plague. Someone mentions the miller again. This time, it's about how his fields have been dying off for months, and someone suggests it could be a curse. One person even dares to mutter, maybe the miller's wife is behind it all, before quickly glancing around, half expecting someone to overhear. The entire tavern seems to have turned into a soap opera, where everyone's got a role to play, and each new rumor adds fuel to the fire. People lean in, eager to hear the latest tidbit, while others exchange knowing glances as if they already knew all of it. The stakes are small. These are the lives of peasants in a tiny village, after all, but the drama feels real. And as is often the case in small communities, the gossip becomes almost as important as the reality. Everyone has a part to play, and no one's truly safe from the web of lies, half-truths, and speculation that spreads like wildfire. As you finish your ale, you can't help but feel the weight of it all. The tavern is filled with laughter, yes, but there's something darker lurking beneath. These are people just like you, trying to survive in a world filled with uncertainty. And when you're not sure what else to hold on to, gossip and drama become the glue that holds everyone together. The stakes may be low, but the consequences can feel just as high. In this little tavern, everyone's business is everyone's business. As you prepare to leave, you step out into the chilly night air, squinting as your eyes adjust to the lack of candlelight. You've survived the night, but you're left with a deep sense of regret, and possibly a few bruises. The decision to spend your evening here seemed like a good one at first, but now you're not so sure. Did the ale give you that headache? Was the stew actually soup? And what was the deal with that one jester, anyway? As you walk away, you find yourself wondering why you thought a medieval tavern was a good idea. But hey, at least you got a story out of it, right? You shuffle through the dark streets, the cold air biting at your skin as you replay the events of the evening. The first round of ale was a mistake, but it felt so right at the time, just a way to fit in, to embrace the madness of the medieval tavern experience. The second round, well, that was peer pressure. Everyone was so friendly, or maybe just too drunk to care, and it felt rude to refuse. By the third round, the room had started spinning, and you were sure you were either going to lose your lunch or your dignity, or maybe both. And then there was the stew. You thought it was going to be some hearty, comforting dish that would soothe your drunken haze, but instead you were served, whatever that was. The broth was more like a lukewarm liquid mystery, the meat unidentifiable at best, and the vegetables, if that's what you want to call them, barely resembled anything you'd willingly put in your mouth. At some point, you had stopped asking questions and just shoved spoonfuls in your mouth, mostly to avoid thinking about the fact that something was still moving in the bowl. But the worst part, you finished the whole thing. Because why not? It's all part of the experience, right? The jester, though, is what really gets you. What was he even doing? You had assumed when you first heard the clang of the bells and the shrill, high-pitched voice announcing his arrival that you'd be in for some fun, light-hearted entertainment. Maybe a few jokes about local politics or the occasional pratfall, but instead, you were subjected to an entire evening of what could only be described as madness, with his antics bouncing between awkward squats and nonsensical gibberish. The worst part was, everyone loved it. They laughed so hard, you thought they might choke. And you, in your drunk stupor, awkwardly clapped along because, well, that's what people did in medieval taverns. And now, as you walk away, you're left wondering if you were part of the joke, or if the joke was just on you. You stop for a moment, rubbing your temples as you try to shake off the lingering fog of regret. Was the night worth it? In the grand scheme of things, it was a mess, a cocktail of bad decisions, questionable food, and a strange desire to be a part of the madness. But maybe that's the thing about medieval taverns. They weren't about comfort or good decisions. They were about surviving the chaos. And you did survive, barely. As you continue walking away, you realize that, in a weird way, you wouldn't have had it any other way. You're leaving with more than just a headache. You've got a story, something you can share with anyone who asks about your wild night out. Sure, you'll probably never eat stew in a medieval tavern again, and the sound of tambourines will haunt your dreams for weeks. But you were there. You saw the absurdity. You felt the discomfort. And in the end, you survived it. And that's probably the best thing you'll take away from this experience. So as you slip into the comfort of your own bed, free from the sticky floors and questionable food, take a moment to appreciate what you've just survived. Sure, it wasn't glamorous. Sure, it was loud, uncomfortable, and full of strange, possibly dangerous characters. But somehow, you made it out alive, and with a story, no less. The medieval tavern was never meant to be a place of comfort. It wasn't about luxury or refinement. It was a chaotic, unpredictable world where people came together to drink, gossips, and survive the madness of life. And you, for one night, were part of that madness. From the slaps of dice hitting the table to the never-ending music and the looming threat of the plague, It was a reminder of just how much we've come to take our modern comforts for granted. And yet, the people who lived through that era, who spent their days in damp, crowded taverns, battling with bad food, bad ale, and bad decisions, they had something we might not fully understand: resilience. They survived the filth, the chaos, the danger, and they did it with humor, with camaraderie, and with the occasional questionable decision. In many ways, they had it worse, but they kept going. And that's something worth remembering, even if it's just for tonight. So as you lay there in your warm, clean bed, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to your ancestors. The ones who lived through lice, leeches, and meals that could probably kill you. They made it through, and you'll be just fine too. Because as wild as history can be, and as strange as medieval taverns were, it's proof of something pretty powerful. That no matter how weird, gross, or uncomfortable things get, people always find a way to laugh, to drink, and to carry on. And sometimes, that's all we really need. Okay, good night.